Ross Taylor's slog sweep is brutalist. It's not even a sweep, is it? He doesn't really need to get all the way down and doesn't always do it. It's more like a standing hockey swat. It doesn't matter if the ball is full and wide or, a perfect delivery to be cover driven or lofted over the offside. Taylor's going to move across his stump, bend his knee like he's going to sweep. And what follows is sort of, kind of like a slog, except that he does it more consistently than a normal slog.
This is the last knock. My dad told me to say this.
There was a time, however brief, where Taylor was one of the best T20 batters on earth. In 2008, he averaged 39 and struck at 182. That was across the IPL, domestic T20s, and some internationals. At that stage, he was playing that shot almost exclusively. If the ball was full, wide, or even straight, spin, seam, it didn't seem to matter. Taylor was in a position to play this shot. His wagon wheels looked more like a compass, and his north was mid-wicket. Other guys have swept quick bowlers before, but Taylor isn't really even doing that. He's not even using the pace of the seamers, really. His shot is forward of square, and it's usually towards mid-wicket. And it's not a cricket shot. It is more of a drag flick from hockey. And no player reached further to hit to leg. This man is desperate to hit this shot, his shot. The single bloody mindedness and the huge sixes are admirable. And it feels like the shot of an outsider, someone who didn't start in the system. And that is what Taylor was. It feels weird to say that about someone who's 16 years into his career, but Ross Taylor came from rugby country inside a rugby country. And the year he made his debut in first-class cricket was the same year that New Zealand players went on strike. Or as Ian O'Brien and others have suggested before, you can't actually be on strike from something that's not paying you in the first place. But because of the actions of these players, New Zealand cricket was changed forever. And because of that, Ross Taylor is probably the first fully professional New Zealand player. And that's how he played, right? Like a pro's pro. Got on with the job, did what was needed, and was as dependable as they come. But he started in a way that wasn't anything like that. The stand-up hockey slap is probably something that came from the days when Taylor was a slogger. Or as Martin Crowe said of him, a dirty slogger. It's also worth noting where Crowe was coming from at that time. Crowe had written a column saying that Maori players, of which Taylor is one, did not have the temperament for Test cricket. There is no doubt that Crowe had a racial issue here, and that he first saw Taylor through that light. But Crowe went on to be Taylor's mentor, and considering the type of players they both were, I'm not sure that Taylor would have been able to find a better fit to look after him. It's also incredible to think how similar their records would be at the end. They obviously played in different eras and had different pressures on them, etc. But Crowe came from a cricket family and was a chosen player at an early age. To end with a record like Crowe's is extraordinary. Though it would have been even better if we'd ever got a chance to watch them bat together. And it's important to note that not only did Crowe go from a heretic to a believer because of Taylor, when Taylor lost the captaincy, Crowe tweeted that he had burnt his blazer in protest. Now, he didn't actually do that, mostly because at the time he wasn't sure where his blazer was. But that's how far Taylor moved Crowe. And in case you don't know, Martin Crowe was the best New Zealand batter of all time. That's literally what they said when the ICC put him in the Hall of Fame. He was weird, creative, flamboyant, sometimes just bizarre, but you couldn't watch him without being hooked. From working out how to play reverse swing through to changing ODI cricket by opening with a spinner. Crowe was a first-tier legend. And Taylor was on that path, right? Whether he was going to be better than Crowe was always debatable. But it was clear that at the very least, he could be the best batter for New Zealand for a very long time. In 2012, he averaged 54 while making hundreds in India and Sri Lanka. And in 2013, he averaged 72. Unfortunately, 2013 was also the last year that Kane Williamson averaged under 45 in a calendar year. It wasn't that Taylor got any worse. In fact, he probably continued to improve for a long time. It's just that Kane Williamson is just better. So any chance of Taylor being the next great batting hope was taken away by the bloke standing at the other end. And he did quite literally stand at the other end a lot. Taylor and Williamson as a partnership have more than 1,000 runs together, more than any other partnership in New Zealand history. Taylor's next best partnership with McCullum is way back. Prince Brendan McCullum is the other player complicating Taylor's legacy, what with the whole coup thing. Very few were harder on McCullum when he manoeuvred to get Taylor out than I was. But history suggests, if nothing else, that McCullum had perhaps the biggest influence on a national team in modern times. New Zealand went from a timid nation where their best players were disappearing to play in the IPL, into a team that has made the last 3 ICC finals, winning one of them. Taylor might have gone on to be a very good captain, but that transformation probably doesn't happen under him. If only because Taylor was a different kind of leader. But the team was splitting under him, and he was seemingly not able to bring them together, and that certainly happened under McCullum. But again, Taylor was on the road to being New Zealand's best modern batter, and Williamson comes along, and then he was on the road to become a long-term New Zealand captain, and McCullum took that from him. before eventually Williamson almost eradicated him from the map altogether. But Taylor was still a remarkably talented player, capable at both home and away. He made hundreds in England, India, Sri Lanka, and a 290 in Australia. This was a player whose skills travelled, even if he was clearly at best when he was at home. Peak Taylor was really from the start of 2012 until the end of 2017, and he was magnificent in that 6-year period, averaging over 50 and also more than Williamson did. The players who averaged more than him in that time: Pujara, De Villiers, Clark, Kohli, Sangakkara, Chandrapal, and Smith. Taylor was up there with the best names in batting for a very long time, and he was averaging over 50 for 6 years. That's one hell of a magic trick. But Taylor actually had a good start to his career. It's really only been since the pace-playing pandemic that he's struggled. And all that could be related to his age as well. But that's Test cricket. In ODI cricket, he wasn't a good player. He was most probably an all-time great. He probably got good at the point where many people were paying attention to T20 cricket. And while he flirted with being good there, his heart just never quite seemed in T20. In ODIs, he's just a straight-up legend. Of the players with over 6,000 runs, he has the 7th best average of all time. His strike rate is slowish, but still quicker than Williamson. And part of his job in the team was to support the guys like Guptill and McCullum and the hitters down the order when they were going really hard. The idea was for him and Williamson to bat long, and he batted incredibly long. And it would be hard to make any case for him not to be an all-time ODI great player. And Taylor is probably not at that level for Test cricket, but he's certainly an all-time New Zealand player. And the combination of those two things means he's probably a near certainty for the ICC Hall of Fame. But even just now, he's an automatic legend for New Zealand cricket. He's currently their top run scorer in Test cricket with their 5th best average, and in ODI cricket, he's number one, most runs and best average. His place in New Zealand history is completely assured. Taylor had an eye test after struggling in a Test match in 2015 against Australia. He had a small benign growth in his eye. A few days later, Taylor made 290 after being told to simply open his eyes wider and use some eye drops. Eventually, he'd receive eye surgery. But in the 2 years before that eye test, he averaged 51 across all international. And in the 2 years after that eye test, he also averaged 51 in all international cricket. That is a batting master. If he had that problem with his eyes and still managed to be that successful for that long, that's so far beyond a dirty slogger or even someone with a lot of attacking shots. That means you're in rare air when it comes to batting talent. And one thing I always loved about Taylor was the combination of the aggressiveness with the fragility. He was about to pump you over deep mid-wicket or carve you through point. But early in his innings, he had this nervous energy about him that made it feel like he was going to go out any ball. And it made watching him nerve-wracking or exhilarating at all times. But I want to finish up with something that happened towards the end of his career. Ross Taylor hit the winning runs in the World Test Championship final. Think about where he came from, the Maori boy from rugby country who entered the amateur system, became a professional who starred all around the world, and ended up being the person who confirmed New Zealand as the first World Test Championship winner. That innings wasn't even a 50, and it's not really about that innings, is it? With Ross Taylor, it's about everything he did to get to that point. It was a long, hard slog at times, but geez, there was some fun along the way.